hitting record right now. It's recording.
That's why I'm doing that. I'm J. Rose Pepe, the committee chair, and I'll be turning this meeting over to Scott Diener, the former chair, to chair this meeting in case I have to step out very quickly. So go ahead, Scott.
And you're muted.
All right. Thank you, Jay, and our thoughts are with you. I see we have a full attendance tonight, so we'll go ahead and get started. Are there any additions to the agenda?
Did everyone see that I sent out an updated packet today with one item added to it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess I've got a question. Well, sorry, Fred. Question for Nick. I only need to be here for the park conversation, right? You don't need me for anything else?
Are you talking about Gibbons?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't.
Or Windfall.
Oh, yeah, I think it's the first two items perhaps, but we'd love to have you stay for the whole thing.
Okay.
But you don't have to.
Okay. There's one agenda item I'd like to add, and it involves gray Chevrolet and the lights. I think that I've talked to the mayor a little bit about this, but there's substantial light pollution coming off the gray Chevrolet lot that's going to be impacting to the development that's proposed in the area. Not sure what we can do about it, but I'd like to add that to the agenda, item number 8.
I'd just like to modify item 7, which is probably just going to be a discussion. I have a feeling it may be an ongoing item. Actually, I'm sure it'll be an ongoing item. But with that, I'd also like to discuss the idea of land use possibly getting more involved in, I guess, homeless type issues. And that's badly phrased, but I'll explain it more when we get to number 7, which I'm sure will be a discussion item by the time we get there.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and talk about the use of the Gibbons Field. I see that we have Mr. Showers here to help with that discussion, perhaps. I'll turn this over to staff.
And I think actually the mayor was going to lead this, and I don't see him here yet.
Well, then let's jump to item number 2, which is the Windfall Place Park. And we can talk more about Gibbons when the mayor does show up.
All right. So I'm going to share my screen just so you get your bearings here. The Windfall Place Hot Lot was a developer dedicated pocket park in a neighborhood just off of Pottery. This is the Google Street View of the park. It's in pretty bad shape in terms of ongoing maintenance. This, and I'll show you on the map where this is. So just south of South Kitsap Boulevard, you go into Sage Court, and it's here on this corner. In any event, the Kitsap tax parcel viewer shows this as being a city-owned property. And we had been moving forward under the assumption that this was actually a city park, and somehow we had missed that this was ours and not, in fact, the HOA's. But Stephanie in our planning department recently was reviewing the final plat for an unrelated issue and noticed that this park was actually in the final plat documents is supposed to be maintained by the HOA of the subdivision here. And I also understand that this HOA has now disbanded, or was never formed. It was set up by the developer and then just ceased to meet. And so it is now defunct. So I think the question is, what role and responsibility does the city want to take for this, what is really a neighborhood amenity that was supposed to be privately maintained? In our draft park plan, which is going to be on the agenda later, this is shown as a city facility and would become part of our city park program. Based on what we saw in the final plat documents, we're not sure if that's the direction that we want to go here. And
have you had a legal analysis, Nick?
We have, and I think that I guess the legal analysis didn't go so far as to look at whether we can make the neighborhood still be responsible for this, but we can certainly send it to the attorney for further review if that's what the council would like us to do.
I think the challenge here, Nick, is I agree there was a lot of vague. We had ponds that we had to pick up later due to vague language with this particular developer. It's been kind of problematic, but I would say that this park was intended to be, especially during the era, it was intended to be a private HOA maintained tot lot. And for some reason, the city ended up with ownership. It's been a problem for the city because this has become historically a parking space for 4x4 vehicles where they park on the slope. I would love nothing more than to have this go over to the HOA, but I think that the problem you have is I don't know what legal vehicle you would have to turn it to, you would have to do some sort of a plat amendment to turn it, create it as a tract and turn it back to an HOA that's defunct. I don't know if that can even be done.
Well, it is, I mean, the tax parcel currently exists and it's in the city's name. So we would just need to deed it to the HOA, I
If the
believe.
HOA doesn't exist,
Right.
Although the HOA is supposed to exist, but I don't know. What do we have slated in terms of park improvements for this site?
I don't think we have any specific improvements identified other than the need to make just basic like irrigation and do more maintenance type work. I mean, obviously you can see in the photo here, one of the swings is missing. It doesn't have irrigation, so it's just in kind of sad shape.
I think it might be quite a challenge to deed this over to an HOA. And I guess would that be considered a plat alteration, Mr. Bond?
I don't think it's a plat alteration because it was shown as a pocket park on the plat. It's just, there is a contradiction on the plat in terms of who was supposed to maintain and who was supposed to own it.
Okay.
but so typically if you had a tract of land, let's say this was tract A and it was supposed to be dedicated part of the HOA, everybody's legal description in this plat would have how many lots are in there? 50?
Yeah, something like that.
So tract A my legal description would read, I own lot 32 and 1/50th of tract A, right? So I think that it would require a plat amendment and forget about the HOA because you're required to have an HOA and CC&Rs, but you're not required to maintain one. And so if they've disbanded their HOA, what you're really talking about is you're not talking about the HOA. You're talking about each individual homeowner that's willing to take 1/50th ownership of this. And how would you even do that? You would have to have some sort of plat amendment, I would think.
And that's the part, if we headed down that path, that I think would be difficult to sell to the plat signatures. Because if I were in their shoes, why would I, when it's understood that this is something the city should be taking care of currently?
Yeah, I agree.
But my question would be, what is the city's legal responsibility? What would stop any other developer from setting up a pocket park and then, for lack of better words, forcing the city to take care of it? I look at the opposite side. I look at it as, do we really want to be in this business and can we sell the land?
I think that the answer to that, Jay, is the city had an opportunity when the plat was recorded to have done their due diligence and made very clear that this was supposed to have been maintained by the HOA and not by the city. And if the plat document said that, but somehow there's an error made in the recording somehow, I don't, I've been doing this a long time. I can't think of anything that we can do legally to turn this back over to these lot owners.
I think we need to get more information, probably a legal opinion of what we actually can do. Um,
What I can share is I don't believe this would happen today with our current staff. This is something, sins from prior administration that we've inherited, and we're trying to fix it. So, going forward, we shouldn't have this problem because I believe we do things right. This didn't get done right.
I'm saying instead of taking on additional, when we have lack of resources, my question is it something that we could possibly sell and somebody could build on it?
Yeah, another alternative would be to remove the improvements that are falling apart and just restore it with native plantings and let it be a natural area.
I have a better idea. This area is synonymous for parking issues because the developer didn't provide any parking. And I think you could theoretically have the city turn that into a gravel lot that could be used for overflow parking, even though it would be in the city's name. But at least
So if we were to approve that plat today, there would be a open space requirement. Is that correct, Nick?
There would, yes. And I believe they dedicated some pretty significant wetlands. I think this tract here is a wetland complex. So even though it's not usable, they did provide a significant open space. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm not sharing my screen anymore. My apologies.
yeah, it was
That's all right. I can see it in the packet.
It was a
Page 4.
passive
I guess my concern is if we take away the open space that's usable for this plat, we're kind of treating this a little differently than we would an ordinary plat where we would want maybe some active or passive recreational opportunity to be available.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So what is the parking like? Are people, well, first of all, are there sidewalks? No.
Sort of.
There are, okay.
Yeah, we can see a truck parked what looks like on the sidewalk, or is that
There's a
driveway
light
pad?
pole in the middle of the sidewalk, and this guy poured a pad to create extra parking.
Okay.
We've had, and this is one way, and you can see that vehicle's in the wrong direction, but there have been issues with people parking on the sidewalks. This has
And in
been
the front yards, like
problematic.
5 cars in a front yard. I think I've seen that in this neighborhood.
Yeah, this has been a problematic subdivision for parking issues.
They didn't think people would have more than 2 cars, and they didn't think they would park on the street or need to
Well,
park.
they planned for 4 cars, but everybody puts storage in their garage and then can't park there.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
This
kind of a classic issue.
particular developers was known to the city for creating problematic subdivisions.
Well, I guess to put a bow around this for now, I think that maybe a little more legal opinion is needed, and then I'll just weigh in. Barring that, I would prefer it restored to sort of native plantings in a field over a parking lot. I think having just a park that become free parking is begging for storage of vehicles and boats and what have you.
Okay, I agree.
I definitely agree.
Okay, we will route it to the attorney's office and get an opinion.
But I guess,
So-
Nick, we could give the plat owners the option. It's either going to just get planted, or they could somehow purchase it. Somebody could purchase it. Because if I had a small children in there and I'd say, hey, I want this, and I bought this under the, it could be a legal challenge from a lot owner that's felt like they were warranted some sort of play area. So I think the attorney needs to take a careful look at it.
Mhm. So Mayor, we skipped the first item on Gibbons Field. I believe you had asked that be added to the agenda, and I'm not sure I have enough information to present this. So do you want to speak to this first?
Certainly. Sorry for my tardiness. I think Bob Shower's here, and I'm not sure if Bob, you brought anybody else from Little League with you?
Well, I was going to bring Nate Martin, but he went to the Mariners game and he was going to try to.
He's on my
tattoos.
screen. Nate Martin is here. So,
Okay.
all right. So Bob and Nathan Martin are here this evening, and the Little League, South Kitsap Western Little League has leased the Gibbons Field for many years from the city, and they run a great operation there. They are contemplating raising money to put in turf on the field. And before they make that type of significant improvement, I just felt we'd be important to check in with the city council. And you know, we've got a parks plan. I don't know if the parks plan and the public outreach spoke to any of this or not. I probably doubt it, but I just didn't want to administratively just tell Bob, go forth and do good. And they raise a whole bunch of money, and then the city council, I got sideways with the city council. So that is what I know.
And if I could jump in here, Mayor. So a couple questions. Are you looking at just the South Kitsap Western Little League field, or also the Pony League field?
It'd be the South Kitsap Little League field. Yeah, the Art Michelson Memorial Field.
Okay, just not the Pony League, because that also has South Kitsap Pee Wee use.
Right.
I guess the only issue that I would like to raise for consideration by council, and this is a legislative decision, is when you think about Van Z, when the soccer club put the lights up, that was a $25,000 grant, and they established a contract with the city in which there was a pay down. And if the soccer players left prior to the pay down, the city was obligated to pay off that grant balance. And that scenario actually happened, and we ended up having to write a check for $16,000. So one was I'd want to make sure that the city understood completely any financial responsibility and a time frame associated with AstroTurf. And the other thing that I would want to just caution is, or I guess to Bob, is, you know, the city's leasing this at $10 a year or something. And so if the city were to say in their park study, for example, that, you know, and I've heard some council members in particular mention the fact that, you know, is this park area better served specifically for baseball rather than just, because it's not for public baseball use. It's only for Pony League or events that are put on by the Little League. It's not for public use. So I think that's a big decision on if AstroTurf goes down, because if it does, at that point, you're committing it to be for, you know, specific baseball use and not neighborhood use. And at that point, is it really property that should be purchased rather than leased? So that, I guess those are my thoughts and considerations, having talked to other council members in the public.
And I would add, I was going to share the page on Gibbons Field from the draft parks plan, just so everybody can see what it currently says. It does indicate that the existing improvements, there's one grass lighted field, leased, not available for public use. It says that about another field. And it does not identify at this time turf improvements as a possible improvement to the park. So if this was going to go forward, I think we would want, even if it's privately funded, we want to add that to the parks plan. But my thought on this is that the Recreation Conservation Office has grants that require a 50% match. And a big thing that they do is do field turf type fields for multi-purpose, where it can be striped for baseball or soccer or football or whatever kind of stripes you want to put on it. But there's a chance that if Mr. Showers in the Little League was able to raise the money, we could potentially leverage that money and get 50% more out of the state to help pay for the project. But I think as a condition, then it has to be open for public use. So there's certainly a grant funding opportunity component of this as well. But that should be part of the discussion.
There's one more piece as well, which has to do with MRSA. We've been limping along on ADA and grandstand safety. I think Bob, you made some repairs a few years ago to some of your grandstands. I know that the Pony League grandstands weren't meeting our insurance requirements. So I think, again, there's just a bigger conversation around the use of this area and the commitment and the financial commitment, which I think would also include MRSA coming in and saying, no, it's time to, put in ADA and child safety grandstands and things. So, because we've really been on the fringe with RMSA on that.
Well, I know we did make some changes and stuff. We shortened our grandstands on the third base side, put up additional rails and everything. You know, you guys had given us a list of items that we needed to fix, and we had gone through that and fixed those. The only thing we're thinking, as of right now, I mean, you bring up a lot of good information about the funding, but as of right now, our thought process was we wanted to raise the money to put turf on the Art Michelson Memorial Field that we use that for baseball, mainly baseball. All the other fields, the T-ball area there, the smaller field, and then the big field, of course, we share that with the Pee-wees. We were looking at, it's a field called Freedom Field over in Mill Creek, and they had their fields turfed. And they do have some additional lines in there for like a smaller soccer club or something like that. I guess it depends on what you want, what kind of striping you want put down on the turf. But that's what we were looking at, and we wanted to make sure that, like you said, if we go additional funding, if we started this, we wanted to make sure that you guys knew and then just didn't hear about it from a second hand.
Well, this type of scenario would only work on the Pony League field. Your Art Michelson field isn't large enough for this. I don't even think the Pony League field's large enough to fit a regular pitch in.
Well, they had the Freedom Field. Is that the picture of the Freedom Field in Mill Creek? Yeah. See, that's a small little league field. And I don't know if they play some kind of micro soccer on there or whatever they do, but that's what they have additionally put down there. So
I still don't think that would fit on the Michelson.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I wonder whether, there's also ADA access requirements in the parking for this park. There's several issues, like Mark said, concerning RMSA, but also other code-related issues. And I'm wondering if this doesn't need to be more of we need to come up with a master plan for the park.
That's what I was thinking, Nick. I agree. It looks like, so this field, or I should say soccer fields, vary by the age of the players. So they get smaller as the kids get younger. So I would agree. I think we need to put some greater thought into what could be.
Well, one of the main problems in it, if you guys are going to do that, you got a problem with your drainage system over by the smaller field. And I'm sure you know that.
Well, that's another thing, is in our storm comprehensive plan, we do have a plan for this, but I think the current plan is to open it up and like recreate the stream through there. So that's something that we're still grappling with. They'll, rather than just putting it in a pipe, that requirement through ecology may have a significant impact. So I was kind of leaving that in the bag, so to speak, because we're trying to define more accurately really what that's going to look like. But we do know that we do have a drainage capital improvement program that we have to figure out through here. So, and then you've got obviously the active club, and then we got the Pee-wee and the snack bar in that building. So there are a lot of moving pieces, and I just don't want you guys to go raise a bunch of money and then, you know, get a field in there, and then 2 years later, something else happens. It's not fair to you.
Well, that's what I was wondering. And also, you know, one time we had mentioned that we would like to purchase that area in there. Would that be something that the city would consider?
It's probably a mayor response, but
I haven't had any indication from any council members that they desire to sell the property. Park space is pretty precious to us. And
Right.
you got 3 council members here, but council members that aren't on this have shared with no desire to sell it. So.
Yeah, well, our concern then, you know, over the past, I know I've been there 30 years, and we've done a lot of upgrading and stuff to that facility in general. And, you know, so we're looking at, you know, is this something, I mean, we paid for the lights, we've kind of foot the ticket for everything. So is this something that we may ought to decide, hey, maybe we need to look for something else now that you guys have a plan for the whole complex and we really didn't know anything about it?
Well, we don't have a plan. That's what Nick's saying. What Nick is saying is versus rushing out and doing these improvements, we need to develop a plan, a holistic plan, you know, because as you're pointing out, there's drainage issues. There's ADA access issues. It's a much bigger thing than just putting turf down.
Right.
And we need a holistic plan for this potentially if we're going to do something. You know, this is probably a couple $100,000 improvement, isn't it, Bob?
Oh yeah.
Right, and you just said, Bob, that, you know, you've done the grandstands, you did the lights, and if we just said, yeah, put down the field turf, and that's just one more thing that you've kind of committed to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the answer is in this parks survey. You know, what does the community want for this public space, which includes, again, not just the fields, but it's the active club, you know, that it's that whole facility as a central park area. If they came back and said, no, they didn't want it, then I'd say that the council might say, yeah, we'll just go ahead and sell it. But if the park survey comes back and it shows a need, then there's no reason to keep you guys putting money into it when there's a different need.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that having fields here that can be more widely used is probably a benefit to both the Little League, but also other users in the city. I mean, you're going to get use out of this facility year round. We did the master plan for McCormack Village. I think 10 years ago, we paid about $100,000 to come up with the master plan. And then we actually had to design the park improvements. But I think doing that master planning exercise for this as a specific park might be a really good project. And that will allow us to then apply for grant funding and lower the bar in terms of how much you would have to raise to put turf on one of these fields. And we'd make sure that we get it right in terms of drainage and everything else. My other concern is I have never permitted a field turf under the stormwater manual, and I don't know if it's an impervious surface or if it's considered pervious for stormwater.
It
So
is. Remember the high school
pervious surface.
And they had to put in a drainage system.
Mhm.
It's a draining system, an infiltration system, but it's
so there's potentially a stormwater engineering component of putting together the field turf, the plan, and you know you're doing geotechnical evaluations to look at infiltration. There's a bit of work that has to be done as part of permitting a field turf project.
But I think you hit on the key thing, Nick, which was council members that I've heard from. The concern has been that this is it's a central core park, but it's been primarily only for peewees and Little League use. And that would be quite a divergence if it were suddenly gonna, because that's why the South Kitsap Soccer Club went to Van Zee, if you remember, and did the lights, because there wasn't really room here. So I think that's the bigger question of having the parks plan put together to see, could this truly be a multi-use facility? And at that point, it may look completely different and redone, and it wouldn't be, specifically for South Kitsap Western Little League use.
All right, so Nick, what are your thoughts about trying to incorporate some language into the comp plan?
Well, into the parks plan, I think that has to be direction that comes from council, and obviously we value the Little League and we want them to stay here and be part of this area of Port Orchard. So we just need direction from you on how you want this to read in terms of identifying, if we want to do a master plan, we should list it here, and we should also list field turf improvements if that's part of the desired possible upgrades.
Well, I don't want to speak for the others, but I'm okay with heading in that direction.
I concur.
Jay, or sorry, not Jay, Fred?
Get a thumbs up from Fred.
Okay. All right. Well, just because it's in the park plan doesn't mean we have to do it, but I think that's good direction. And I think we should look at it.
And one of the things we're going to have to do as part of the parks plan is the consultant has not given us a capital improvement program that actually programs out revenue and when we're going to do what project, but it seems reasonable to me that this could be one of our top priorities. I think it's very widely used. We have a lot of requests for fields, and other than McCormack Village or the McCormack Park Phase 3 improvements, I don't know of another park project that, I guess the waterfront redevelopment is also being prioritized. But I'm not aware of other park projects that are top priorities right now.
Okay. Final comments, anyone?
I guess I have just a couple quick things, if that's all right. The first concern that I have is if that were to turn back into a stream, now we're putting an active water feature or something that could be a potential issue for kids in an active park, as far as the stormwater drainage portion of that goes. As far as field turf is concerned, it's generally considered a pervious surface. There's a tremendous amount of gravel and drainage rock that goes underneath those things in order to allow the water to percolate back into the ground. So most of the time on installations that I see, there are no retaining ponds or anything else in the area that causes issues with those. And then as far as the master plan portion of it goes, I can get some drawings that would reconfigure that park. I don't personally have a problem with a little wider usage outside of our regular season usage. I do have a problem putting in obviously really nice facilities and then having other clubs come in and abuse that and not maintain it to the level that we would expect it to be maintained. So if the city was going to allow it to be used for other purposes outside of Little League, Pee-wee, we already have Pee-wees, paying their part of the grant. There was definitely something that was either overseen by the city or in writing that says you must maintain it to a specific level.
That brings up the bigger question of the city. At what point do we actually create a Parks and Rec department, which we've been talking about for years? So really, whether you intended this or not, this field turf request has tipped over a lot of dominoes, and they're running through with what's the best use of the facility, what sort of facility can go there. Are there drainage concerns? Are there ADA concerns? Is there a higher and better use for the park? So this is all good conversation. And I think, as Nick suggested, we've really got to start looking at the master plan for this, because I think that then a facility of this size, especially if it's going to, because my daughter played fast pitch for years and soccer, and I've been to all these facilities in numerous states. So I always watch and see, oh, here's the city of Kent and their cruiser and working on Saturdays. That's a whole different level of commitment that we currently have. So that would have to be a part of this park plan.
Thanks, Mark. Well, if there's nothing else, let's move on to agenda item. Sorry, was there something else?
Yeah, so one of the requests from our board for Little League has been to establish a challenger division next season, which also brings back to mind that ADA requirement, or at least having some for wheelchairs, working availability for those children that would participate in that particular program. Obviously, if we were going to go for some sort of master plan situation, then we want to make sure that we're not impeding some of that or spending money again that needs to be, undone. But we are actively looking at a way to make sure that we have wheelchair accessibility from the bathroom stall area all the way down to the field and even onto the field. So the turf kind of ties into that just a little bit, just because it's a lot easier for kids in wheelchairs or with special needs to navigate. But that is another thing in the more immediate future, because we'd have to kind of pursue that this summer in order to be ready to host that next season.
Thank you, Nathan. Good to know. All right, Nick.
Councilmember Diener, can we move the water general facility fee agreement up next, because we have a guest for that one and I don't want to make her wait any longer than she has to.
Yes. Did you say water?
I meant sewer.
Okay.
They're not the same, Nick.
I know. You've been telling me that for years.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and jump to item number 4. Nathan and Robert, thank you for your comments.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to mention, we added this as a late addition. We've been working frantically to try to get this ready for the city council meeting next week on the 11th. And this was our only committee opportunity to get this before some of the council members. Normally, this would probably go to finance or utilities, but today it's going to land use. So if you'll remember, in January or early February, you adopted ordinance 009-21 that created sewer general facility fee credit program. We had a credit program previously, but it didn't create much of an incentive to have private developers build public facilities that were part of our long range capital facility plan. And so we adjusted the way that we calculate credits, and we have our first credit request, and Noah and Mark and I have been working with the city attorneys to prepare an agreement that follows the model that's in our code. And if you remember, in our code, there were essentially 3 variables for determining how much credit you could get. And the developer is able to get the lesser of those 3 numbers. So in this case, the facility that they're building was in our capital improvement program at $2.5 million. And if you'll remember, we set a policy that said we would give them credit for the surplus capacity that they create in the facility. And so in the case of this project, which is to build the Ruby Creek North Lift Station, that's near Hovde Road and Gray Chevrolet, and will serve the Sydney Glen Elementary School and that whole basin of Sydney, north of Ruby Creek, but south of 16. So the apartment project that is proposed is going to use 30% of that lift station's capacity, resulting in a 70% excess capacity. And so their credit amount is limited to 70% of $2.5 million. And so the second variable for determining how much credit you get is you have to actually spend $2.5 million in order to get the 75% credit. And so in talking with the engineer for the developer and with our engineering team, we believe that this lift station will exceed $2.5 million, but there is some verification that has to happen on the back end once the project is built to verify that they actually spent enough to receive the full credit amount. The other limitation in our credit code is they can't actually get more credit than they owe in capital facility charges. So we're not going to cut them a check at the end of this. We will offset what they owe on their general facility fee. But and in this case, their general facility fee for 216 apartments is about $1.84 million, and 75% of $2.5 million is $1.75 million. So the credit amount is just a little bit less than what they owe in a general facility fee. So the way the agreement is written is we are asking that they pay at the time of building permit the difference between the 1.841 million and 1.75 million, so about $91,000. And we are deferring the remaining $1.75 million because we assume that they're going to spend enough money to receive a credit of $1.75 million. So the agreement is very straightforward. It basically explains the methodology for calculating the credit. It outlines, there's attachments that show where the improvements are that they're building. There's a technical memo from our consultant that explains the design parameters that they are designing to. And it is our hope that this can be approved on the 11th because on the 14th, they are planning to submit the permits to actually build the sewer lift station because they're on a timeline where they want to break ground on these apartment buildings this summer, and they will need sewer in place before those buildings can be occupied. So the agreement that's coming before you, it provides a $1.75 million credit. We do have to check the receipts at the end of the project to make sure they've spent the correct amount. And once we verify that, they would either potentially owe a little bit more money if there's a difference between what they spent and the credit that we were assuming we would give them. But if they spend at least $2.5 million, then we are all square and the city has a new lift station and the developer has new apartments. So that was a pretty high level presentation. And I'm sure that having just received the agreement today, you probably haven't had time to really read the details, but I at least wanted to conceptually present this to you so that you could think about it between now and next week. And if you had any questions, you could reach out to us in advance of Tuesday's meeting.
I think the burning question I would have is, and I'm just going to answer my question is, so how do we ensure that they build those improvements, and we would withhold their certificate of occupancy? I believe, Nick, would be the answer.
Yes, that's correct. And I believe they're putting up a performance bond. Is that right, Brianne? I think there's a performance bond provision in here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Am I allowed to speak, Nick?
You are, yes.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to meet you. Brianne with obviously the applicant and the developer, Tarragon. There is a provision in there on the requirement of the performance bond, which I think, to quote city code, is about 150% of the value.
That's correct. It's section 9.9C is where you would find the bond requirement for the improvement.
Yeah.
Nick, you mentioned a technical memo. Was that from our staff or is that from Murray Smith?
Murray Smith and via BHC. And so they're the ones who did the calculation of how much capacity is being used by the development. And this is this is not as linear a calculation as our finance department would have hoped, because the facility that they're building is being built to be expandable. And so what our engineer found was that they're putting in pumps that are that they're actually using about I think it was 36 or 39% of the pumps, but the wet wells are sized to be much bigger and they're only using 17% of the wet well capacity. And so it's an average of 30% for all the components of the lift station. And the reason that we had to make it expandable is that there are 2 storage projects, self-storage projects in the basin. And one of those, I believe the permits are close to expiring, and I don't know what the status of the RJ Peabody storage units are in the county. Scott, you may actually have familiarity with that. But if for some reason those did not go forward as storage units and became apartments or some other use, we would have a significantly higher demand for sewer. And so this lift station is designed with a third a third set of mounts for dropping a pump into the wet well, so that we can expand the capacity if it's necessary, if we have those higher volume uses in the future.
Yeah, I'd just like to throw 2 cents in. Actually, Nick, having remembered the discussion previously, you actually made more sense of it today than I remember the discussion when we got it at council. So if you do that again on Tuesday, I think it'd be very favorable explanation. And it is good to know that we have the excess capacity that we'll need in that area for growth down the road. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Fred, do you have anything? No? Okay. I think we're, unless there's anything else from anybody else, I think we can move on.
I've got just one question for Brianna. Brianne. What is your connection to the Apollo moon program?
That's the Saturn rocket, which was a Lego project for our family this past year. So
Okay.
yeah, that's what you're seeing in the background. Thanks, everyone. I see you again in a few days.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Cheers.
All right, what's next on our agenda? I seem to have misplaced it.
The sub-area plan.
All right. I'm looking at the clock. I don't know if we have a hard stop time. I can go as long or as short on this as you'd like. The Planning Commission did vote to recommend approval of the sub-area plan last night. The mayor was in attendance at the Planning Commission and brought up something that either we misinterpreted or forgot about, and that was the zoning along Sydney Avenue between Kitsap Street and Dwight Street. The mayor mentioned that at least some of the council members had asked that that be not changed to neighborhood mixed use and instead remain R2, and that it's on both sides of Sydney going up the steeper part of the hill. So that's one alternative that's going to be coming forward to you. We're going to prepare a second zoning map that has that minor deviation. But otherwise, we had a couple of questions from members of the public. We had one person who expressed concerns about the county's acquisition of private property for the courthouse project and parking areas and was concerned about eminent domain. But really, at the final review, we didn't have any real testimony opposed to this. We did send another round of mailers to everybody who was affected in terms of their zoning being changed. And Carrie, did we do a radius on that, or was it a specific mailer to those people who were directly affected? I can't remember.
This one went directly to everyone who had a property or business that was proposed to be rezoned.
Okay, yeah, we did the more general hearing earlier, and
that was
so,
for the public meeting for the EIS. That went to the radius.
Right. So the plan, I mean, we've responded in the EIS to every comment that was received in the earlier phases of the review. We did get significant comments from the tribe, from Fish and Wildlife. We had special stakeholder meetings with a couple of interested parties downtown, which the city is one of them for the community event center. And so that whole west downtown area was sort of reworked. But the new thing that you haven't seen before, and which was discussed last night again with the Planning Commission, are the development regulations that actually implement the plan. And so the development regulations include a handful of modifications. There's minor modifications to the downtown mixed use zone concerning the build to zone requirements, because we realized that our community center is not meant to be storefronts. We needed to have some flexibility when it came to designing civic buildings, and also trade-offs. If somebody provides a pedestrian plaza or active pedestrian space, we wanted to make sure that that alternative building types could be accommodated. You didn't have to bring everything to the street if you were trying to create it like a public plaza. So there were revisions there. We made a couple of minor revisions to the land use tables, and specifically, parks are now allowed in several of the commercial zones where they previously, you had to rezone the area to be a park rather than having it in a commercial or residential zone. With all the restoration and the waterfront improvements we're talking about, we wanted to make sure that the parks were already an outright permitted use downtown. And Carrie, I think I accidentally closed my packet, so I'm struggling to find my list here. I know that parking was on the list. And Carrie, if you can share the screen and go through the development regulations, if you happen to have them up, I want to make sure I don't miss anything. I'm going from memory here. We did revamp the parking standards downtown. And those goals were all in the plan. We talked about having entrances to the 640 Bay Street property off of Bay Street near City Hall and the need to get to that ground level parking deck. We've also expanded, right now, if you're a downtown mixed use property abutting Bay Street, you have reduced parking requirements. We want to extend those reduced parking requirements to all of the downtown mixed use zone, whether you're on Bay Street or not, if you're in the downtown. And so those parking standards are, there's no parking required for ground floor uses. There is a 1 stall per unit requirement for multifamily. And if you don't have on-street parking adjacent to your building, you've got to provide an extra 0.25 stalls per unit. So there are some tweaks to the parking code. In our design standards chapter, we modified the block frontage maps because there was actually a transition at the bank site where we're putting the community center. So half of that property was downtown storefronts and the other half was marine. And so we had a weird transition in our design standards that did not work with redeveloping that particular site. We modified the height limits in our downtown overlay district. What GGLO made us aware of is we currently have a limit of 3, 4, or 5 stories. And then we had a number of feet associated with each of those buildings. It was 38 stories for 3, a 4-story building was 48 feet, and a 5-story building was 58 feet. GGLO informed us that because of new HVAC requirements and other constraints, you really needed a little bit more height. We were fine. We kept the story heights the same in most of the downtown. It was just giving an extra 10 feet to accommodate higher ceilings on the ground floor and additional mechanical equipment in between floors that is needed to actually achieve a 3, 4, or 5-story building. The downtown height overlay district likewise was amended. In terms of downtown, the only property that was changed was the block next to City Hall. And if you'll remember, the area to the east of the stair climb has been increased to 5 stories. And then the area west of the stair climb and next to City Hall, we made it step down so that within 50 or 100 feet of City Hall, it's only 4 stories so that we'd have more of a transition next to our more prominent City Hall building. We didn't want it to be dwarfed. And then we did extend the downtown height overlay district, the 5-story district up Bethel to the Mile Hill roundabout, and included some of the areas just to the north of the high school to allow for more building height in those areas. So I think you've already seen the plan itself and all of the graphics that were updated. What did I miss for codes? Oh, there is a frontage improvement code that is new. It's modeled after something that we found that the city of Tacoma uses, and it's a frontage improvement code. Right now, we have a very clear ability to require frontage improvements when there's a subdivision. We have a very easy ability to require it if SEPA is triggered by a project. But if somebody's just coming in for a building permit, the only way that we can require frontage improvements is through our concurrency code. And it is a nebulous process that we worked with our consultant to create, but it is difficult to administer and it is cumbersome. What Tacoma does is they have a catch-all at the time of building permit that basically says if you're building new construction or if you're remodeling and doing a 50% valuation improvement or more, you can be required to do frontage improvements at that time, which include replacing old, broken, cracked sidewalks, making ADA improvements. If your property is served by an alley that is gravel, the alley can be required to be paved. And so one of the things the downtown plan called for and one of its goal was to ensure that as development happens downtown, that there would be frontage improvements. And because we're doing a planned action EIS, which waives the SEPA process, we needed to have code in place that would require frontage improvements. And so I think we're applying that standard citywide, so it's available citywide, but it's really intended to implement this downtown goal, but I think it'll be very useful elsewhere in the city. The other portion of that code, which it's 20.202 is the code section that was in your packet, is if you're doing minor work like a change of use or a change of occupancy where you actually are remodeling a building and setting it up for a different use, you can be required to do certain offsite improvements, but we've created a cap in terms of how much money you can be required to spend. We're not looking to make somebody spend $5 million on sidewalks. If they're really just repurposing something, we might just use the code to ask them to repair the broken sidewalks and put in ADA accessible ramps. So there, I think it's a 10 or a 20% cap. You can't be asked to spend more than 10 or 20% of the valuation of your project to do offsite improvements. So that code, I think, will be really useful. Oh, and the other thing that code does is it sets up the opportunity for a fee in lieu of construction. So if you get onto a dead-end street, which we have a lot of as you go down to some of the ravines up near the county campus, if it doesn't make sense to put a sidewalk in somewhere because you're at the end of a road or it's a steep slope or it's just not going to be used, we're proposing to create a fee in lieu of construction program for sidewalks where you could pay a fee rather than having to build a sidewalk that won't get used. And we've talked to finance, and finance is going to set up accounting so that if we receive one of those fees, we would have a sidewalk fund that can then be used to spend money on sidewalks elsewhere in the city. And so that's yeah.
How will those requests be evaluated?
Well, I think so it gives the director the ability, and there's I don't have the language in front of me because I accidentally closed out of my packet, but
Do you want to
just
give
gives
them
the
the ability to share screen?
Oh yeah, sorry. I was wondering what was
Yeah, you're the host.
sorry, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah, it gives the director the ability to make that determination. And I think it gives some examples such as if you can go down to the very bottom of this chapter.
And it starts on page 72 of your packets.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
go to subsection 5. There you go. So upon approval of the director, yeah, it doesn't establish criteria here.
Sorry, guys, I have another meeting. I'm gonna bug out on you.
All right, thanks.
Okay, see you, Rob.
I think further up there is a criteria where so under bullet 2, just above section 5, stay there, Carrie, you were on it.
Oh,
If you go to bullet 2 where it says offsite improvements are dependent on the project type and the threshold, there's an exception in cases where topography or other conditions make it impractical. And so, yeah, the director is just going to have to make a determination of whether it makes sense not to have sidewalks in a particular location. And I would envision that we would adopt a linear foot fee in lieu amount, so that if we do our fee resolution, we'd look at the cost of constructing sidewalks, and you'd have a $75 per foot fee that could be paid instead of making that improvement, or 20 feet or $20 a foot or whatever the current cost of concrete is.
Right.
So anyway, the attorney reviewed that and said that she's still thinking about this language, and so it may change between now and the 25th, but she was comfortable that this is a tool that we have that we would memorialize in an agreement with a pre-established rate, and presumably it could be brought to council if that was your pleasure.
Okay.
Carrie, did I miss any code sections?
No, you kind of went over everything at a fairly high level, but I don't think you missed anything.
All right. So I don't know how much you've had time to spend reviewing the sub-area plan, but are there any questions you have before this comes to work study that you'd like to ask now?
Yeah, Nick, I just want to piggyback on Scott's comment. I know it sounds, sometimes the ADA gets a little onerous. And, when we talk about not putting in something which makes sense to us, how do we avoid any conflict with, ADA regarding sidewalks or other amenities? Does that make sense?
Right. Well, and I think that's the issue, is that we are required to upgrade all of our sidewalks to meet ADA standards. And so we have a huge liability already. If we have existing sidewalks along the frontage of a project, our expectation is that the developer will make that ADA accessible as part of their project. The problem is we don't have an explicit code trigger for offsite improvements now, except for our concurrency standard. But like I said, it's much less clear than this. And some projects don't have to go through concurrency review if it's simply change of use or remodeling an existing building. So this is sort of a catch-all at the last step to make sure that the sidewalk network is being built out in the city.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Nick, I don't, go ahead, Fred.
Oh, I like the summary you gave, and I'm just always interested in whatever has changed from prior versions, and I think you summarized that. I am interested in what I guess Rob presented to the Planning Commission. Did they pass it that section would remain R2?
No, they are deferring to the council because I didn't recall exactly what the council had asked for. And I remember having a discussion about shrinking what was shown as county campus. I didn't remember actually having a discussion about the zoning designation. So the zoning that was proposed by our consultant is I believe it's neighborhood mixed use, right, Carrie?
Yes.
So neighborhood mixed use allows for houses, it allows for duplexes, it allows for shopfront homes. It allows for a few more building types than R2, but it doesn't get rid of houses. So houses are a conforming use under that zone. So I think the question is, maybe some of the properties could stay residential mixed or neighborhood mixed use, but others shouldn't. We may need to look at it at a little bit more granular level. And so I would encourage you to study that area. And Carrie, can you actually send that to the land use committee? Because if you have thoughts or comments that you want to send via email, it's a really small 4-block area where the changes were. And the before and after, I'll show you on the, Carrie, I'm going to stop your share and share the plan here.
Okay.
I'm just going to the right page. And
What did you want me to send the committee?
that map that I sent you and Mitch today, where I outlined the area of concern.
Okay.
So I'm going to hit share. So on page 75 of the plan, which is, it's actually 74 and 75 in chapter 3, you've got the existing zoning map and then the proposed zoning map. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, if it'll let me. Uh-oh. Well, I don't think it's going to let me, but you can see that the area between Kitsap and Dwight on both sides on the existing map is a solid kind of medium yellow, which corresponds to the R2 zone. And on the new map, you can see everything, including what's down in the ravine, kind of behind the mayor's house and behind the public works building at the county. That whole area is now shown as neighborhood mixed use. It's a yellow crosshatch. And so that's the area that the mayor thought he had heard direction that council wanted this to remain R2. And that was where I either misunderstood or forgot of that direction. And so the question is, do you want this little it's not even 4 full blocks, it's really two full blocks and 2 half blocks here, whether you want those to go back to R2.
I would agree that we didn't discuss the particular zoning when we were talking in general terms, but I think what he captured is accurate, because that little section is, I don't think, appropriate for potential shop fronts. It's very sloping. I guess you're talking about the 200, basically you're talking about the 300 block of Sydney, I think, between Kitsap and Dwight.
Yeah.
300 and 400 blocks.
So I think you've got the museum there. And actually the museum is south of Dwight, isn't it?
It's the museum. Oh, are you talking about the log cabin museum? Is south of Dwight.
So you've got the mayor's house and that big house across the street from the mayor.
The Affletooning house, yeah.
Yep. And then
100 block.
The only area that, if we were going to change this, I could potentially see a couple of the areas down on Kitsap Street closer to City Hall remaining residential mixed use, or I'm sorry, neighborhood mixed use. But I tend to agree, the ravine doesn't need to be rezoned because nobody's going to be able to develop that at any point in all likelihood.
Yeah, currently, so is Kitsap the demarcation line, like north of it is neighbor? I can't tell on the
I
little one.
can't.
I should look on the.
I
on
just-
my
Yeah,
Zoom.
it's.
I just emailed that little map to everyone if you wanted to click on your email and see that area in full detail.
I'd probably lose the Zoom if I
Oh,
did that.
I finally got it to blow up here. Let me zoom in. So hopefully you can
Okay.
see it a little better now.
Yeah, that
Mhm.
okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. No, I see what you're saying, Nick, that maybe some of the parcels on Kitsap Street. What's the blue? The blue crosshatched? Is that?
Oh, that's the business professional mixed use.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
And I don't think that, I think that remains the same as before. Yeah, that hasn't
Yeah.
changed to the south of Dwight. So anyway, you can get back to us via email if you
Okay.
want, if you prefer to wait and think about this a little bit more, but we're planning on bringing a plan B to have in our back pocket on the 19th. And if it's the council's wish, we will replace map A with map B and revise the plan prior to adoption on the 25th.
And so you sent us both maps.
Well, both maps are in the plan, which is, there was a link to it on the agenda.
Okay.
It's on page 74
Got it.
and 75
Yeah.
of the plan. So any other questions about this or anything else that we wanted to cover, Carrie, that I have forgotten?
I don't think so.
All right. I think it's Carrie's turn to present something. I'm winded.
This is fairly brief
Okay.
because the next item on the agenda is the Parks Plan update. And we just wanted to go ahead and give you the first full draft of the main body of the Parks Plan that's been prepared by our consultant. He is still working on wrapping up the appendices to the plan. But we wanted to go ahead and just give you the main body of the draft so you could get a first look at it. We weren't planning to really have a discussion of it today. It's kind of a large document, kind of detailed. We did want to bring it back to the Land Use Committee next month for a more full discussion. So we hoped that by giving that to you now, there would be some time for you to look through this, and we'll try to actually get the appendices out to you a little bit earlier than just a few days before the meeting, the way we usually do. So you have time to look through the complete document and all the appendices before this discussion. But maybe by having this a month early, we can get some detailed feedback from you. If possible, even, feel free to give it back to Nick and I before the meeting itself, if you have emailed comments. This is what our consultant has been working on for the last, Nick, now a year and a half?
I think we started in January of 2020. So
Yeah,
almost.
That
it's
sounds
been
right.
delayed a lot because he's had to kind of blend in with that, what we've been doing with the downtown sub-area plan and then the community events center. And so there's been some constant change and flux going on as he's been trying to keep up with other things that we've been doing downtown and in the city. So, but hopefully we're getting towards a complete and final plan that we can adopt fairly soon and start working from and adopt into our comprehensive plan as the parks element, or functioning as our parks elements. We can get going on some RCO grants. That's the hope. So just please be looking at this over the next month and think about comments that you want to give to us and questions that you'll have for us at the next land use meeting. And we'll have the full and final, hopefully final plan for you at the June meeting.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
I think it was, I can't remember the time frames. I apologize. But I know we had a discussion at one point in time about several areas that, could we possibly put parks in these areas? What would fit? Does this plan kind of more define that? For example, there was the area across from Fred Meyer, and it was like, yeah, we definitely wouldn't want to put a park there, but it'd be a great place for a utilities, another building, maintenance building or something. So, I mean, will this plan, kind of like really focus on where parks should be going, in discussing of land that's owned by the city, or is it still kind of a pretty detailed overview?
There is a lot of that. Most of what you're going to see there is in the appendices. So, like I said, we'll try to get those to you as quickly as possible. A lot of that is in Appendix B, which is existing lands and facilities, and Appendix C is additional opportunities. So that's identifying both existing land that the city has, but is not really making full use of at this time, or land that's being used for other purposes that could be reused or used for multi-purpose, such as parks and something else. And then there's also other opportunities for public-private partnerships, other things like that that are worth having the city explore in the future. So yes, he did go into some detail looking at other possibilities for what we can do with land that we already own, or other things that we could develop in future as we try to expand our park ownership.
So do we also take into account, is it Veterans Park? We've had the discussion about the county.
In terms of he's not really advising on what the county or the city should or should not do, but he does get into he looks at when we did the survey, Veterans Park was one of the areas that he concentrated on, asking people, what do you want to see for Veterans Park? How important is it to you? Do you use it? What do you see in the future there? So that's one area that was concentrated on. And in terms of the financing and the demand and what is proposed in that area, Veterans Park actually was one of the areas that was focused on. So yes, there is a lot of, I think, what will be helpful information for that area. But I think concluding as to what the city should do, that he left up to city council.
Yeah, I understand that, and obviously that's the discussion, but it is addressed. That's what I was wondering.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think we were also reaching out to the county to see if we could understand their annual maintenance costs as well.
Okay.
Okay, all right, so we will give that a read and get you any comments as soon as possible in advance of the next meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, the next item is the draft land capacity analysis.
And I don't believe we included this in the packet because it's a pretty complex Excel spreadsheet, and I didn't want anybody getting hurt doing really advanced Excel spreadsheet math. I just wanted to share with you kind of the summary information from our land capacity analysis process. We've gone through one iteration of this, and we made some modifications to a few of our assumptions, and it revised the numbers slightly. But when we adopted the new zoning code in 2019, I think I remember telling you that the land capacity was likely to increase in the city, meaning our zoning would accommodate more people after we changed the zoning than it did before. And so in 2014, when we did the land capacity analysis, it showed that we had capacity for about 10,000 additional residents in the city. We have grown by 2,000 or so residents since that report was completed. And with the zoning changes, we now have capacity for an additional 20,530 residents, according to this most recent analysis. So we have more than double the capacity that we did in 2014, despite the fact that we have grown since 2014. And that's not to say that we are planning to grow by this much in any near-term future, but it does show what is theoretically possible in our zoning. And there's, they go through the analysis and they start with the land area. They make deductions for various factors. They deduct critical areas. They make assumptions for critical areas, which oddly, our critical area assumptions, we went back through our data and looked at what buffer sizes we're imposing, and they're considerably higher than what the county imposes. I think the county's assumed wetland buffer is like 90 feet. The city's is closer to 115 or 120 feet. That is our assumption. So we are deducting more capacity because of wetlands in our city, and maybe they're more complex wetlands or have higher buffers because they're a class 1 versus a class 3 wetland. But that's one area where we're deviating from the county. We also
Is this city limits only, or does this include the UGA?
This is city limits only. The county is doing the analysis for the UGA.
So how did ours jump from 10,000 to 20,000?
Zoning.
Well, if you remember, when I first got here in downtown Port Orchard, you could do mixed use development, but you could only do 12 units per acre. And so we changed the zoning downtown. We actually got rid of the density limits and just focused on building height. So a lot of this comes from our mixed use zones. And if you look at the mixed use capacity here by each zone, we now have capacity for 5,400 people in the mixed use districts of the city. The other thing that's different is in 2014, McCormack Woods was not evaluated based on what had been approved at McCormack Woods. It was evaluated based on what could be permitted at that time, including the new wetland buffers versus the ones that all of those projects vested to because they were submitted so long ago. So when we put the actual McCormack numbers that are in our entitlements in the buildable lands report, I think that increased our residential capacity quite, at least by a few thousand, or maybe 1,000 or 2 overall. But the other thing that we've done is by going to the form-based code, especially in the R2 and the R3 zone, where we allow for townhomes and duplexes and all the missing middle housing types, our medium and high density residential zones provide much more flexibility and much more infill development potential than they did previously. It used to be that the R2 zone, which was called R8 at the time, was exclusively single family homes. And now because townhomes are allowed, you can put 3 to 4 townhomes in place of every single new home that could be built. So, and frankly, we're not seeing a ton of townhomes being constructed, but I think that has more to do with the contractors that we work with in Port Orchard, the smaller contractors that would be building, so one-off houses in the more established neighborhoods, they don't do townhomes. It's not really in their wheelhouse. So those are the real factors, I think, behind the capacity increases. The other big change is that the commercial mixed use zone that we created, the CMU, previously we had general commercial and you could only do multifamily with a conditional use permit, but we figured out which commercial properties we wanted to allow for either apartments or commercial development. And so those suddenly went from commercial capacity into residential capacity. And if you look at the CMU line item here, that was by itself 4,400 units of housing that's accommodated because we created a CMU zone. So the interesting thing is that this puts pressure on the UGA size. Like remember in 2016, and I don't know if somebody can mute themselves. I'm getting a lot of background.
Not me, but I'll mute myself.
I muted Scott. I muted you because I was getting a lot of background there. But anyway, the what was I saying, Carrie? Help me.
Something about the CMU,
Yeah. Anyway, I think. Oh,
I think Nick, you were gonna.
UGA.
Yes.
We were talking about the UGA. So in 2016, the county contracted the UGA around Port Orchard because we had too much land capacity. Because we have so much land capacity in the city now, I think there's a chance that somebody may say that the Port Orchard UGA needs to be reduced again. However, and I mentioned this in my comments at a recent council meeting saying, you know, if people may want to consider annexing because of what the findings of this buildable lands report are going to be. However, in Vision 2050, the regional growth strategy, there's a specific policy that calls for stable urban growth area boundaries during the next 10-year planning period. So I think at least in terms of vision, we would have an argument that the regional policy is to not mess with the urban growth boundaries. And so if there was going to be a reduction in the Port Orchard UGA, I have a feeling the only way that would happen is if another area of the county wanted to expand the UGA. They may try to contract Port Orchard UGA so that there's no net increase overall. But I think in particular, if it's still the city's intent to someday annex the areas on Bethel South and any of the areas south of Sedgwick, it seems to me that those are the areas that would be most at risk of being removed from the UGA if that were going to happen. But I think because vision calls for stable urban growth area boundaries, I think there would be a good case to argue against making any changes. And I think that could be used as a defense in any potential appeal about UGA sizing. But needless to say, the county was sort of shocked at how high our land capacity analysis was when we presented it to them. And so they're still digesting this and trying to understand the implications, and they're probably mad at us.
Well, I'm not sure. Yeah, their anger is not my concern, but I am actually more concerned about, theoretically, their UGA would be able to have a higher capacity if they adopted our zoning. Does that make sense?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So
right.
if we annex the UGA, the land capacity of those annexed areas is going to be higher in the city of Port Orchard than it is in the county, because our regulations provide for more development potential. So I think that's really important. I also think that in terms of utility system planning, you know, when you build facilities that are intended to last 100 years, you don't size them based on a 20-year projection. You size them based on how much development is expected to occur in a basin or on a particular sewer or water main. And so it's important that we have realistic estimates of what we need to be building so that we get pipe sizing and infrastructure facilities sized correctly. And likewise, our transportation system needs to show that the roads we're planning to build are going to be able to accommodate the traffic associated with these types of numbers, even if it's, you know, more than 20 years down the road that we would get to, you know, this would mean we're just under 15,000 now. So this takes us right to 35,000 residents within the current city boundaries. Which I will add that if you look at other cities in the region that are, you know, maybe a little closer to Seattle, but are, you know, suburbs like Bothell. I mean, Bothell is roughly the same size as Port Orchard, and I think its population is pushing 60,000 people at this point. So, and they still have plenty of residential neighborhoods, and it's a perfectly nice and desirable place to live. But it's certainly a different number of people per acre than what we are used to in Kitsap County.
Nick,
So
what I think will be interesting is when the time comes for population allocation discussions and what others believe our fair share should be in light of additional capacity.
Yeah, and I don't know if you all remember this discussion, but we're in the same regional geography as Paulsbo, Kingston, and Bainbridge Island. And Kingston has a pretty finite capacity. I think they're in the 3,000 to 5,000 range is about the max that could be accommodated in Kingston. So if you take Kingston off the top and split the remainder 3 ways, that means we're planning for about 10,000 people over the next 20 years. But then, of course, if Paulsbo or Bainbridge Island doesn't want such a high number, they're probably going to try to push it in our direction and say, plan for this. So I think, you know, I would be comfortable with probably no more than about 1/3 of the allocation for the geography that we are in, which would be maybe 13,000 to 14,000 people tops is a planning target. But anything more than that, I don't think we can't paddle that fast.
I'm eager to hear how those discussions go when the time comes.
All right, so that's yeah, this is mostly just an informational piece about where we're at. These numbers may still change as we talk to the county, and there may be some adjustments that they ask for, but it seems to me that we're going to be in the ballpark, certainly north of 15,000. And I think when we started this, we were closer to 23 or 24,000. And when we adjusted our wetland buffers, the number came down a bit. But I would prefer to be closer to 15,000, but the numbers are what the numbers are. And they could easily be more than this too, if we use slightly different assumptions.
Scott, I don't mean to interject here, but we're coming up on 90 minutes. Is everybody still good?
I'm going to have to get on the road actually, but I could still call in and listen for this last piece. What is the last item? I'm It's the transient housing issue. And Mark, I was really kidding when I said that we'd love to have you stick around. You don't need to be here.
Well, if it's, yeah, I guess I was sticking around because the homeless transient situation is fraught with pitfalls and hurdles. So I definitely need to be involved in the conversation.
My question is this something that, I don't mean to kick the can down the road, but is it something that's going to be a lot more in-depth that should have than just trying to piecemeal it, a phone call and a item?
I think depending on what the actual issue is, I think the police chief probably needs to be involved. Because it has to, so I don't know, Fred, exactly what it was, but understand that the Boise decision, that federal decision changed how we can do anything. And the health department is making requirements of us that sometimes go against the Boise decision and make it very problematic. So it's a pretty involved subject.
Yeah, and I just wanted to introduce it. I know that I hopefully this will need more discussion, hopefully earlier in an agenda of a future meeting. But my concern for bringing it up, one of them was that I just want to understand that if there is a parcel in the city limits where someone wants to have some sort of transitory accommodation, let's say, for example, they wanted to have 5 tiny homes or cabins. My understanding is that it's not allowed anywhere in the city. So I just wanted to find out what our current, I guess, zoning actually allows. And if it doesn't, maybe we want to look at what both the county have done. And there's 2 things that Carrie provided. They have temporary, transitory, and then they have, oh, I forgot what the other one. And Bremerton has a temporary encampment, but I'm thinking we may need to look at what they've done and see what we need to do. I understand there is state legislation. It's 1220. I don't remember if that's House bill or Senate bill. And that may put a little more urgency under our addressing an issue like this. I would also like to just bring up, and not now, but just introduce the ideas I like to bring up. I understand that Paulsbo has done things where they had a caretaker residence in one of their parks, and they have contracted out with Coffee Oasis to provide housing for young women in that caretaker home. I also understand that they are subsidizing Kitsap Homes of Compassion, which provides boarding houses to people with low income. The city is out of their general fund paying for a portion of Kitsap, each of those rentals, utilities to the tune of $6,000 each. So there are certainly ideas, and we don't have to do everything Paulsbo's done, but I think they show a good example of what can be done, because we've certainly I don't want to say kick the can, but we've avoided the topic, I feel, in our city, and I think we could just look at different ways to address it. Obviously not tonight, but that's why I wanted to bring this up. And I think Mark is right. I think the police chief would be a good participant. I don't know if you think this is beyond land use and maybe this should be another ad hoc committee, or I think parts of it certainly overlap with land use.
Well, I think based on what you've said, I'm going to recant and say that this isn't a police public works issue. This is a planning exercise. This has to do with formalized transient housing and zoning and potential funding. I was thinking it was more of kind of homeless boats, homeless Blackjack Creek. That's a whole different thing. This is more going back to what the county was looking at with the tiny home. That's really what the topic is. It's the tiny homes kind of initiative and not the homeless situation. So I don't think the police chief would be involved in all in the discussion that you want, or public works. I think this is a land use legislative directive conversation. So
Yeah, and all I was trying to bring up was I didn't want to do it with 5 minutes to go in the meeting. And this is something that, Carrie, I'd like to have, if it's amenable with the other 2 members, a primary, primary focus at our next meeting, so we can kind of put our hands around it and see what we're, what we're trying to discuss. Would that work for you, Fred, or did you want to bring something?
No, that sounds great.
Because I'd like, I don't want to spend just 5 minutes on it now. I think we need to get some more information. And if we could, talk about that at our next meeting, that would be awesome.
I think too that if we're going to have to be responding to directives from the legislature in our code soon, that's also something we're going to have to be involving the city attorney in, as to how we're going to do that and meet our legal requirements. So again, this is a bigger picture than just trying to mimic what other cities have done up to this point. I think it's becoming a bigger picture item that we need to pay more attention to.
Yeah,
Carrie, do you have those
discussion now.
legislative bills, or Fred, can you at least send Carrie what they are so that she can at least start doing a little bit of research?
Nick has them.
Nick has them. Okay. So
Yeah.
it sounds like you got everything in place. Yeah, this is.
We have, yeah, I share.
Oh, Nick, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm on my car phone. Can you hear me now?
Sort
Yeah,
of.
kinda.
Okay. Oh, well, you said most of what I needed to say, so I'll stay off.
Yeah. So we're good. This will be a future
Yeah.
meeting.
Our next
A
meeting.
big topic.
Yeah, our next meeting. Scott, you want to add anything?
Yeah, Fred, if you could send an email to the group, just kind of framing the issues that you'd like to have discussed, maybe prioritized, I think that would be helpful as well.
Yeah. I will make sure
can-
this is on the agenda for next month.
Sure.
Early in the meeting,
This is,
please.
definitely
Yes.
transient accommodations, transient housing, tiny homes, kind of as a main title, so it's not confused with kind of the homeless situation. That's a whole different spectrum of issues. I mean, they're related, but from the city's perspective, they're different.
So I can tell you that from the county's perspective, there probably could be some additional work on this. This code was adopted in 2017, and I don't know that there's been any project that's gone to ACUP, and I think there's been a handful of projects that have looked at trying to host somebody on their own property. So the single family hosting concept. But this code has not been used by the county.
Okay, that's good to know.
I mean,
I
we've
think
been
it's emerging now because of the Olympic Fitness Facility on Mile Hill. I think they're going to be adopting it now. So yes, it hasn't been used beforehand. And Scott, you're right. I was thinking that if someone wanted to host this on their own private property, or if a church wanted to, I don't know what the parameters are. So maybe that could be something we look at.
Sure. And yeah, absolutely.
we've got to look at, so those are organizations that have the capacity to host, but we don't want to create a situation that we currently have where you've got private property owners that are just willy-nilly using that as a means to have junk stockpiled on their property, and then we have to go clean it up.
Oh, I completely agree with you, Mark. This would be actual habitation. For example, if I wanted to put 3 tiny homes on my house, people would be living in them. And we need parameters like what do they need, what kind of sanitation, and so there's all sorts of details. But no, junking up the neighborhood is not my goal with this.
Well, I mean, when, in our code, correct me if I'm wrong, we allow 1 ADU, don't we?
Yes.
Yes.
And see, some cities have gone to 2 ADUs. I mean, I'm talking about some of the larger ones, and that's something that it's worth talking about and considering. Are we limiting ourselves? How can we help address situations? I think that's what Fred's kind of getting at. I concur, but like I said, it's not for the last 5 minutes tonight.
Right. And
Scott,
Go
you
ahead.
had one more item, actually. Your
Yeah.
great Chevrolet lighting.
Yeah, I try to avoid Lowe's after I get off work, and so I go at night. And driving back from Lowe's, the gray Chevrolet lighting is going to be blasting those new apartments that are coming in. It's pretty substantive. When you drive by there at night and look at it, it's a football arena of lights that are leaving the property. And so I mentioned it to Rob, and Rob's not all that confident that there's anything we can do about it. I think probably the first thing to look at is whether the permit required downcast lighting or had conditions to avoid light pollution. It's light pollution issues have been around for a while. Maybe it was a part of the permit, maybe it wasn't. But if you go there at night and look at this lights, they will be a problem in the future. And I would encourage anybody who's interested in this to do that. I sent a photo to Rob, but it doesn't really do justice until you actually go there and look at it.
Could you send that?
It wasn't noticed before because of all the trees, but they're gone, and it's quite a bit of light.
Right.
Nick,
Well,
can you hear us? Is that something you want? Is that something you want Katie to look at to see if it's consistent with the permit?
Yeah, either Katie or one of the planners, if they can do some research, can you pass this along to them, and we can follow up with the next.
Yeah, that you're talking about a land use decision back in the 90s, I think, when that was built. So I don't know
if it was in the 90s, then
I think that more than likely they're due unless.
Yeah, we think we might have lost you, your vocal side anyway.
So, Carrie, I'll just add that I don't want to be heavy-handed on this, but it will be an issue that has to be resolved when people are living there, because especially in the wintertime, it's a lot of light.
Well,
Okay.
you know, PSE can shield, we can ask Ray Chevrolet to voluntarily, because those are their lights, they can shield, put a shield on the south side of all the lights.
The part that I want to be sensitive to is their business is currently down. I think we know that there's an issue with chips and vehicle availability, and times are hard, and I don't want to come at this too hard, really. But again, at some point,
they'll want to be good neighbors too.
Yeah, I think they're going to appreciate the development from what I hear. So, and maybe it's something that if it is a permit issue, then we can just ask for a phased addressment of the issues.
I will pass this on then, first of all, to the planner of the week, and just have them look at go back and pull the permit and see what conditions were on there, and see if there's anything that we would want to pass on then to enforcement, and just have them make an inquiry. Maybe there wasn't anything, so then, you know, but let's just have someone pull the permit and see what they were required to do.
It will certainly be helpful for any development that's occurring at night, because it's lit up.
Okay, will do.
All right, I think that's it. It is 10 after 6. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Carrie, thank you.